Hey besties, welcome back to the channel or the Patreon or wherever this may land. Today we are back with more on the Diddler, Sean Combs, P. Diddy, Puff Daddy, Brother Love, whatever you want to call him, the creeper of the moment. Yeah, we have some new court documents here from Dawn Richard, from Danity Kane, and also Dirty Money, if you remember when he made that little side group. I haven't read anything from it yet. I've just seen very short headlines and like things that people were saying on Twitter. So I'm interested to dive into this after the Little Rod case and the Cassie case. It's just case after case. As you all know, Diddy has been arrested. These are not the documents from the indictment. I have those as well. That will be the next video. But yeah, I really just want to dive straight into this. It looks like there's about 55 pages here. So yeah, make sure you have your wine, your water, or your rolling tray, or whatever you need to tune in with me while we get into this Diddler tea. Like, who are you to close off Earth? For legal reasons, if any kids are watching, you're right now. Okay, so here we have Dawn Angelique Richard versus Sean Combs, Harv Pierre, Remote Productions, New Remote Productions, Diddy and all his entities and everybody that does business with him. Dawn Angelique Richard, known professionally as Dawn Richard, is an American musician, singer, songwriter, and performer. She gained widespread recognition as a member of the girl group Danity Kane, formed by defendant Sean Combs, and later transitioned into a key member of Mr. Combs' band Dirty Money. Defendant Sean Combs, a once celebrated hip-hop mogul, popularly known by his stage names Puff Daddy, Puffy, P. Diddy, Diddy, Love, skyrocketed to fame in the 1990s, became a powerful and enduring figure in the music and entertainment industry. In 1998, Hope nothing happened to Diddy. Because I'm waiting for them to say he Epsteined. Can y'all please? Oh my goodness. In 1998, Mr. Combs explained the origins of his stage name in a USA Today interview. His nickname was Puff because he had a temper and was known to huff and puff when he was angry. I actually never knew that. Over the decades following his rise to fame, Mr. Combs' star-studded, larger-than-life persona overshadowed his vicious temper and persuasive acts of violence directed towards those in his inner circle, specifically women. Mr. Combs' namesake temper frequently manifested in physical violence. Mr. Combs regularly hurled objects in fits of rage, often throwing items such as mobile phones, laptops, food, and studio equipment across the room or at people. On numerous occasions, Miss Richard witnessed Mr. Combs brutally beat his girlfriend, Cassandra Ventura, Cassie. His persistent abuse included choking, strangling Miss Ventura, striking her with his hands with objects, slapping her, punching her, throwing items at her, including a scalding hot pan. So everybody knew. Let's be clear. Everybody knew what was going on. They just could not stop him because then it would be them next. And some of them just straight up didn't care. I felt like they could have said something though, because look at Aubrey. She never stopped running her mouth. On many occasions, Miss Richard tried to intervene, offering Miss Ventura support and encouragement to leave Mr. Combs. Each time, Mr. Combs learned of her efforts to help Miss Ventura and became enraged, threatening Miss Richard's life with statements such as, "You want to die today? I make no go missing and I end people." Everybody can't be lying. For years now, like we're not even gonna act like all of this just came out and nobody's been saying anything for years. Like, everybody cannot be lying on this man. Oh my gosh. Compounding Mr. Combs' violent acts and death threats, he flagrantly exploited Miss Richards' musical talent as a singer and writer while withholding her rightful earnings, stealing her copyrighted works, and subjecting her to years of inhumane working conditions, which included groping, assault, and false imprisonment, among other violations. For nearly a decade, Mr. Combs manipulated Miss Richard with mantras that submission to his depraved demands was necessary for career advancement, instilling in her that the belief of such abuse and exploitation were required for female artists to succeed in the music industry. It was not until Miss Ventura's bravery in coming forward that Miss Richard realized her own personal suffering was tied to the many years of abuse by Mr. Combs that had become normalized for her. As more women courageously come forward, she has been empowered by this collective strength and now adds her voice to the growing chorus of victims bravely sharing their stories. Together, they seek justice and stand in solidarity as the latest victims of the Me Too movement in the music industry. And here we go. Factual allegations. Miss Richard is selected to be in Mr. Combs' all-female music group Danity Kane after competing on MTV's Making the Band. In or around 2004, Miss Richard was selected to participate in season 3 of Making the Band. The show centered around the formation and development of a new musical group under the mentorship of Mr. Combs. The contestants would compete and be chosen by Mr. Combs to form a band which would go on to create albums and perform. For aspiring artists like Miss Richard, Making the Band represented a concrete path to a career in the music industry. Miss Richard appeared in seasons 3 and 4 of Making the Band, which first aired in 2005, and in season 5 of Making the Band, which aired in 2009. Out of thousands of contestants, Miss Richard, along with approximately 12 other women, were selected to participate in season 3 of Making the Band. 5 women, including Miss Richard, were ultimately chosen to be a part of the group Danity Kane, which was named by Miss Richard. Prior to and including the first Danity Kane album, Making the Band was filmed entirely at Daddy's House recording studio in New York. The Making the Band content that focused on Danity Kane's work on its second album, Welcome to the Dollhouse, was filmed at Daddy's House and at Mr. Combs' Miami residence. To create Making the Band, camera crews filmed 24 hours a day, gathering months' worth of footage to condense into mere hours of entertainment for viewers. Danity Kane released its self-titled debut album in August 2006, and its second album, Welcome to the Dollhouse, in March 2008. Danity Kane's first album sold over 4 million copies. Damages to Miss Richard for unpaid salaries are estimated at $1 million. Mr. Combs fired bandmate Aubrey O'Day and Juanita D. Woods from Danity Kane on live television in the height of its fame in 2008, which resulted in Danity Kane being disbanded in 2009. During the auditions and on the set of Making the Band, Mr. Combs projected an aura of superiority, wealth, and power. Mr. Combs regularly wore sunglasses and avoided looking at the female contestants in the eyes, contributing to an atmosphere of uncertainty and intimidation. During auditions, Mr. Combs spoke to the female contestants in a hostile, condescending manner, making disparaging gender-based remarks, such as calling them oh my God. Miss Richard felt threatened and intimidated by Mr. Combs' blatant disdain for the young women, who were excited for the opportunity to be on his show. Once the band was made, Mr. Combs' contempt for women was readily apparent as he continued to display aggressive and hostile behavior towards Miss Richard and all of her female bandmates. Mr. Combs disintegrated their physical appearances. For example, Mr. Combs stated that Miss Richard was too skinny and needed to do something about her face. Is that why Dawn got all that surgery? That's sad. On one occasion, on or around 2005, during the first season of Making the Band 3, Miss Richard observed Mr. Combs' ex-partner, the mother of his 3 children, Kim Porter, leaving Mr. Combs' recording studio in tears with visible facial injuries, including a lacerated lip. Realizing that Mr. Combs was capable of committing acts of violence against women caused Miss Richard to feel deep apprehension and fear that Mr. Combs could one day physically harm her. Miss Richard was present when Mr. Combs introduced Cassandra Ventura for the first time in or around 2006. The moment Mr. Combs first saw Miss Ventura, his demeanor noticeably shifted. Mr. Combs positioned himself directly in front of Miss Ventura's seat, invading her personal space and fixated on her with an intense, unyielding stare, isolating her from the other people in the room, including Miss Ventura's then boyfriend, music producer Ryan Leslie. Like I said, stole his girl and stole his laptop. I need Ryan's story. I'm so sorry. I need Ryan. I need your story. Coincidentally, this first meeting between Mr. Combs and Miss Ventura was the first time Miss Richard was in Mr. Combs' presence without a camera crew filming. Observing Mr. Combs behave in such an intimidating, predatory manner for the first time that they were off camera made Miss Richard feel deeply apprehensive and afraid of him. Subsequently, Miss Ventura ended her relationship with Mr. Ryan Leslie and began dating Mr. Combs, who would become violent and abusive towards her. Danity Kane, sexual harassment, inhumane treatment, and denial of basic needs by Mr. Combs. The majority of Miss Richard's tenure as a member of Danity Kane and Diddy Dirty Money, Mr. Combs required her to remain at his various residences and studios in New York, Los Angeles, Florida, and New Jersey for activities such as recording, rehearsing, dressing, preparing costumes, and exercising. Throughout the productions of Making the Band 3 and 4, Mr. Combs deprived Miss Richard and her Danity Kane bandmates of basic needs such as adequate food and sleep. When Miss Richard and her bandmates requested meals or rest, Mr. Combs refused and chastised them with derogatory comments like, "You don't want this," or "Y'all are not hungry enough. I'm paying you to work." This demeaning behavior gradually undermined Miss Richard's confidence and contributed significantly to her growing feelings of insecurity and fear of reprisal from Mr. Combs. Mr. Combs would regularly be awake for prolonged periods of time because he was high on drugs. During these periods, Mr. Combs demanded continuous access to Miss Richard and her Danity Kane bandmates, often forcing them to record and rehearse for stretches of 36 to 48 hours without breaks. The regularity of these disturbances led Miss Richard to adapt by sleeping in a sitting position, fully dressed and with makeup on, heightening her anxiety. Over time, this abnormal sleeping arrangement came to feel routine, further normalizing Mr. Combs' invasive demands. In addition to exhausting rehearsals, Mr. Combs required Miss Richard and her bandmates to participate in intense workouts with a personal trainer. On one occasion, while running on the beach, Miss Richard became so dehydrated that she vomited. Instead of offering medical assistance, MTV Network's camera crew filmed the incident, contributing to her acceptance of such treatment as part of her professional life. That is crazy. The unrelenting and rigorous schedule of rehearsals, performance, and near constant filming that Mr. Combs imposed caused Miss Richard to experience extreme weight loss, dehydration, fatigue, and painful rashes from the microphone pack that she was required to wear on her back. These conditions intensified Miss Richard's feelings of powerlessness as she increasingly viewed them as part of her professional reality and feared the consequences of any resistance. And that happens with so many artists, like so often. I know I don't work in that field anymore, but like I still say we because that was still a really big part of my life. We put ourselves through so much thinking, oh, it's just part of the game. It's just part of the package. And it's not. This is not how it's supposed to be. And that's why now people are standing up because they're realizing that none of that was right. In a further assertion of power and dominance, Mr. Combs insisted on holding meetings while dressed in only his underwear. Didn't Lil Rod say that too? On one occasion in 2008 in his Miami residence, Mr. Combs emailed Miss Richard directing her to meet him in the living room. When she arrived, he was wearing only his underwear. Miss Richard asked Mr. Combs to put some clothes on, but he refused, stating, "This is my effing house." Mr. Combs then conducted a meeting lasting approximately an hour while dressed in his underwear, causing Miss Richard to feel violated and embarrassed and amplifying her feelings of powerlessness. This man is sick. Like, he's really the Joker. Following the official Danny Kane breakup in early 2009, Miss Richard experienced significant financial hardship. With no prospective opportunities for employment within the entertainment field, Miss Richard spent several months traveling from Baltimore to Daddy's House recording studio in New York without pay or allocated budget. Mr. Combs promised that Miss Richard's compositions would result in payments of license fees and royalties pursuant to her contract with Bad Boy Records. However, no such compensation was ever reported or paid to Miss Richard. Damages relative to these continuing copyright infringements will be proved at trial. Diddy Dirty Money. Miss Richard experiences Mr. Combs' gender-based physical violence, criminal acts, threats, and intimidation. By approximately the fall of 2009, many of Miss Richard's compositions had been recorded by other Bad Boy artists. Due to the success of her compositions, Miss Richard was invited to meet with the musical artist Kalina Harper, and shortly thereafter, Mr. Combs, Miss Richard, and Miss Harper formed a new group, Diddy Dirty Money. Initial recording for Dirty Money's album Last Train to Paris took place in Mr. Combs' home in Los Angeles, California. The first day of recording, Miss Richard and Miss Harper arrived at Mr. Combs' home and waited in the kitchen, where Mr. Combs' girlfriend, Miss Ventura, was frying eggs for him. Miss Richard observed Mr. Combs come down the stairs looking high on drugs, enter the kitchen, approach Miss Ventura, and scream, "I've been asking for you to fry my shit. I can't stand you. You never do it right." Mr. Combs pushed Miss Ventura against the wall and choked her, then picked up the scalding hot pan of eggs and threw it at her, causing her to fall to the ground in fetal position. Cursing and screaming, Mr. Combs dragged Miss Ventura up the stairs. Frozen in shock and terror, Miss Richard heard glass shattering, crashing, and banging noises as Mr. Combs dragged Miss Ventura up the stairs. Miss Richard wanted to intervene and help Miss Ventura, but Miss Harper adamantly refused to interfere in Mr. Combs' relationship and physically led Miss Richard out of the residence. Terrified and shaken, Miss Richard returned to her hotel where she was unable to sleep due to worrying about Miss Ventura and her own safety. The following day, Miss Richard received a call demanding that she return to Mr. Combs' residence to continue recording. Mr. Combs brought Miss Richard and Miss Harper into the recording room in his studio, locked the door, dimmed the lights, and gave each of them flowers. Mr. Combs went on at length, stating, "This is normal. This was just a lover's argument where no one was hurt. This is what love is. I'm giving you an opportunity. If you want to make it, you'll shut your mouth. If you say anything, there will be consequences." Mr. Combs further warned that people end up missing. Being threatened while locked for over 20 minutes in a small enclosed space with Mr. Combs after observing Mr. Combs violently assault Miss Ventura the day before, Miss Richard was terrified and genuinely believed that Mr. Combs would follow through on his threats. Why don't they just leave? Why doesn't anybody just stop? In or around November 2009, after the Soul Train Awards in Atlanta, Mr. Combs flew Miss Richard and Miss Harper to his house in New York on his private jet for an after party. There were many well-known celebrities at the after party, and copious amounts of illegal drugs were being openly consumed. Mr. Combs had arranged for dozens of young women and girls, some who appeared underage, to be transported to the party. The women arrived wearing little to no clothing and were given drugs and alcohol. Many of them appeared lethargic or passed out while Mr. Combs and his guests performed acts on them. Miss Richard believed that her presence at the party was a test to see whether Mr. Combs could trust her. Mr. Combs repeatedly said things like, "This is a buffet. Enjoy yourselves. This is what we do. This is how we party." This is how we party. Miss Richard felt shocked and horrified at the sight of Mr. Combs and his guests violating incapacitated young women and employed Mr. Combs' personal assistant, Capricorn Clark, to allow her to leave. Mrs. Clark insisted that Richard wait 15 minutes for Miss Clark to make it make sense. That is to make Miss Richard's exit less conspicuous so that Mr. Combs would not notice that she had left. Knowing that she was not free to leave and had to wait for Miss Clark to help her orchestrate her departure, Miss Richard experienced feelings of panic and being trapped against her will. Mr. Combs regularly placed Miss Richard in similar situations with no means to escape. At Mr. Combs' fueled parties, his guests, including Miss Richard, were required to surrender their phones upon entry. Mr. Combs kept the doors locked and guarded by security personnel, making it impossible for Miss Richard to leave without alerting Mr. Combs that she had done so. Mr. Combs hired police officers to attend his parties, sending a clear message to guests that his influence extended to law enforcement officers and creating a climate of fear and a tactic warning that reporting him to authorities would be both unacceptable and futile. And that just goes to show that everything happening right now, this whole takedown of Diddy, is because the people on the inside are mad at him and need a fall guy. It was his time. They used you and then they send you up the river. Just like everybody knew what R. Kelly was doing. The moment they didn't need him anymore and they needed someone to take all the attention off of everybody else in the industry, they put him in jail. Does he deserve to be in jail? Absolutely. Does Diddy deserve to be in jail? Absolutely. But it's just crazy how they do, because you got all the police at the party, but then you got police arresting him. Okay. On many occasions, Mr. Combs had parties in his Miami residence that lasted for several days. At one of the parties, Miss Richard witnessed Mr. Combs openly stating that he had arranged for a busload of young exotic girls, such as mixed Black and Asian, Indonesian, and albino. Albino? Do y'all mean Albanian? I'm sorry, like, not even trying to be ignorant, but like, I don't know why he would order a busload of albino women. Like, I think we mean Albanian. Okay. Miss Richard observed inebriated young girls being sexually violated by Mr. Combs and his guests. In a state of panic and terror, Miss Richard fled to the bedroom Mr. Combs had insisted she stay in and barricaded the door with furniture. Mr. Combs openly assaulted Miss Ventura in front of Miss Richard and other witnesses on multiple occasions. On one occasion, in or around the fall of 2009, Diddy Dirty Money was in New York preparing to perform at a festival. Inside their vehicle, Mr. Combs grabbed Miss Ventura's neck, pulled her out of the van onto the grass, pinned her head down, choking her while yelling, "You gonna get up today." This incident took place in the backstage area just outside the festival and was entirely visible to passerbys. In another instance, in or around early 2010, Mr. Combs punched Miss Ventura in the face in the bathroom of a party in Los Angeles. Frequently, when Miss Ventura attempted to voice an opinion or stand up to Mr. Combs, he would strike her or wrap his hands around her throat and choke her. On the first of several occasions that they observed Mr. Combs assault Miss Ventura, Miss Richard and Miss Harper spoke with Miss Ventura to support and encourage Miss Ventura in escaping her abusive relationship with Mr. Combs. Every time that Miss Richard and Miss Harper tried to intervene, Mr. Combs learned of the conversation and became irate. Mr. Combs screamed at the women, "Y'all get in my relationship. Don't tell my what she needs to be doing. Just make my money. I end artists. I shelve careers. You could be missing. You want to die today?" Oh my God. Interscope Records enabled Mr. Combs' gender-motivated violence. It's real funny. I don't know what's going on over there at Interscope, but didn't Tory say for Interscope to shut up talking about him before he exposes what goes down in that building for real? And I really want to know. I'm really interested in knowing. Interscope's logo is... In late 2009 or early 2010, Bad Boy Entertainment entered an agreement with Interscope Records. Upon information and belief, Bad Boy was paid $50 million in exchange for Bad Boy's future releases being distributed through Interscope. In so doing, Mr. Combs intended to capitalize on Interscope's significant resources and enhance the promotion and sales of Bad Boy's releases, including Dirty Money's upcoming album. In the weeks and months leading up to the Bad Boy Interscope deal, Mr. Combs had frequent meetings with producer and then CEO of Interscope Records, Jimmy Levine. On one such occasion, Combs hosted a dinner at a West Hollywood restaurant, which Miss Richard and Miss Harper were required to attend. Among the guests at the dinner were celebrities like Neo and Usher, as well as Mr. Levine. Mr. Combs and Miss Ventura had an argument. In front of the dinner guests, Mr. Combs hissed at Miss Ventura in a screaming whisper and forcefully punched her in the stomach, causing her to double over in visible pain, crying. Miss Clark escorted Miss Ventura out of the restaurant, Mr. Combs remained and continued socializing with other dinner guests. At this point, Interscope Records clearly had actual knowledge that Combs was dangerous around females and that Combs was willing to brazenly batter a female in public. Even after Mr. Levine watched Mr. Combs commit a violent assault in front of numerous high-profile witnesses, the Bad Boy Interscope deal took place and remained in effect, providing Mr. Combs with immense financial reward and enabling him to commit further acts of violence without fear of repercussions. Watching Mr. Combs openly assault Miss Ventura in front of Mr. Levine and various celebrities, and observing that other powerful music industry representatives were complicit in Mr. Combs' behavior, amplified Miss Richards' fears that Mr. Combs could one day harm her and that his actions would be accepted and normalized by everyone surrounding him. As part of the agreement between Bad Boy and Interscope, Interscope heavily promoted Diddy Dirty Money's Last Train to Paris album. Mr. Levine had presented Mr. Combs with a demo of Coming Home for him to produce a song that would become a multi-platinum hit. Mr. Levine was encouraging Mr. Combs to develop a new sound for the album, into which Interscope was investing significant resources. Miss Richard, Miss Harper, and Miss Ventura all provided vocal performances for this project. Released in November 2010, the album Last Train to Paris became Diddy Dirty Money's most commercially successful project, providing vast financial rewards to both Interscope and Mr. Combs. Mr. Combs subjects Miss Richard to labor trafficking and oppressive working conditions. In or around the fall of 2009, Diddy Dirty Money began recording the song Love Comes Down. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs continued to use drugs that caused him to remain awake for prolonged periods of time. When he was awake, he would demand that Miss Richard and Miss Harper record in the studio, where they would spend 3 to 4 consecutive days recording without a break to eat or sleep. Mr. Combs required Miss Richard and Miss Harper to remain at his homes, continuously denying the opportunity to return to their hotel rooms for breaks. The degree of control Mr. Combs exercised over Miss Richards' daily life and basic needs exacerbated the significant power imbalance and threatening atmosphere that ensured Miss Richards' compliance with his demands. Mr. Combs regularly left the studio and required Miss Richard and Miss Harper to stay and write verses to songs. Occasionally, Miss Richard tried to leave and get something to eat or go to her hotel. Mr. Combs would call and demand, "Where the are you? We have an album to make." Mr. Combs frequently made threats, especially if they asked for food or rest, stating, "You're a I don't want to see your effing face. I make this go missing. I make things go away." Each time, Miss Richard returned to the studio immediately, believing that Mr. Combs was capable of following through with his threats. Mr. Combs criticized Miss Richard for being too skinny, yet denied her request for food and demanded that she drink only peanut butter shakes. Mr. Combs had full meals prepared by a chef and ate them in front of Miss Richard and Miss Harper, never offering them food. Miss Richard and Miss Harper begged for food and rest breaks, but Mr. Combs refused, making statements such as "absolutely not, and this is what it takes to be great." Mr. Combs' responses underscored the threat that he posed and heightened Miss Richards' concerns for her safety and well-being. As Miss Richard continued to work non-stop, transitioning between the studio, rehearsals, workouts, and back to the studio, she became severely dehydrated and experienced chronic stomach cramping from being undernourished and excessively thin. On the numerous occasions that she told Mr. Combs that she was not feeling well, he called her lazy and dismissed her health concerns, instilling her further apprehension of communicating her needs. In or around the summer of 2010, Miss Richard experienced abdominal pain, swollen glands, and a fever. She was hospitalized and diagnosed with joint pain due to overuse, sprains, tendinitis, and infection, anemia, and a low white blood cell count. Miss Richard presented Mr. Combs with her medical records, specifying that she needed to emphasize eating well, being adequately hydrated, and getting adequate rest. But Mr. Combs ordered her to report to the studio the next day for another multi-day recording session. Mr. Combs' blatant disregard for her health and well-being cemented Miss Richard's fear of his authority and control over her career and health. Miss Richard continued to witness Combs' abuse towards Miss Ventura, and Miss Ventura often wore sunglasses and makeup in an attempt to hide visible injuries. These incidents further solidified Miss Richards' fear of Mr. Combs, as they were constant reminders of the physical dangers she potentially could and eventually would face. And this is what I'm saying. This is not even his girl. This is just his artist. It could be anybody. It can be anybody. Mr. Combs often exhibited uncontrollable anger during recording sessions, throwing objects like albums, laptops, and food against the wall or at individuals. Mr. Combs frequently flew into frenzied, unpredictable rages. Miss Richard feared making any misstep that could direct his anger towards her. However, her fears went beyond her immediate physical safety. Because she had witnessed Mr. Combs' violent nature, a side of Mr. Combs that the world had not yet seen, she feared that falling out of Mr. Combs' good graces, or worse, standing up to him or speaking out against him, could result in serious harm to her. Miss Richard frequently thought about Mr. Combs' threat about making people go missing and feared taking any action that could label her as a target. Despite Mr. Combs' violence, threats, and misogyny, Diddy Dirty Money experienced significant sales of records. In or around the summer of 2009, Miss Richard and Miss Harper were required by Mr. Combs to perform as part of Diddy Dirty Money and attend numerous promotional events, including late or overnight parties, all of which were under contract between Mr. Combs and Ciroc Vodka or between Mr. Combs and Diddy Beats, pursuant to the Bad Boy Interscope record deal. Miss Richard was never compensated for the extra time she spent fulfilling Mr. Combs' promotional contracts, including the Ciroc and Diddy Beats campaign. Diddy Beats is just like, I'm just thinking about him beating people, like, that's, and Beats by Dre was real, it's just interesting. Mr. Combs was paid approximately $250,000 per Ciroc appearance. Mr. Combs did not compensate Miss Richard or Miss Harper for these appearances, other than just $5,000 each on a handful of occasions. Mr. Combs' ongoing explanation for withholding compensation was that their appearances were a requirement for their tour. Additionally, Miss Richard was required to appear and promote Diddy Beats through parties, album songs, and videos. Over time, Mr. Combs was paid $6.25 million for 25 Ciroc shows that Miss Richard was required to attend. Following each show, Miss Richard and Miss Harper approached Mr. Combs to inquire about their insufficient and sporadic payments. Mr. Combs routinely responded with statements such as, "You bitches aren't grateful, you don't want this." Miss Richard estimates losses. Oh my, like I'm so stuck. Oh my God. Ms. Richard estimates losses from Ciroc campaigns promotions totaling to at least $1,562,000. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs received an advance on Diddy Beats, for which Ms. Richard received no compensation. Mr. Combs harasses and assaults Miss Richard. Between approximately 2009 and 2011, throughout Diddy Dirty Money's recording processes, rehearsals, and performances, Mr. Combs repeatedly ordered Miss Richard to strip down to her underwear. He frequently referred to her as a alternatingly calling her lazy, skinny, particularly in front of his friends, producers, and bodyguards. Mr. Combs frequently held meetings with Miss Richard wearing only his underwear, despite Miss Richard's protests and repeated requests for him to put clothing on. In response, Mr. Combs called her a and reminded her that she should be grateful for the opportunity to be there. This triggers me so much. Often while they were recording in the studio, Mr. Combs would hold parties where he would invite young men and women who were often scantily dressed and appeared underage to use and engage in sex acts. Miss Richard observed Mr. Combs and his colleagues kissing, groping, and inappropriately touching young women. The participants often left the immediate area to have sex and returned shortly thereafter. On numerous occasions between approximately 2009 and 2010, under the guise of preparing for performances, Mr. Combs would intrude into Miss Richard's changing room at Daddy's house unannounced while Miss Richard was undressed. Even though a female stylist was present and assisting Miss Richard with her wardrobe, Mr. Combs would grope Miss Richard's body, including her bare. With no legitimate purpose and without Miss Richard's consent, Mr. Combs caressed her buttocks to show the stylist where he wanted her high-waist panties positioned and attempted to touch her, claiming to show the stylist where he wanted her bra straps to go. When Mr. Combs would enter the changing room, Miss Richard would cover her chest with her hands to prevent Mr. Combs from seeing or touching her. When Mr. Combs would touch her body, Miss Richard would attempt to swat his hands away and state, "Don't touch me." Mr. Combs frequently smacked Miss Richard's bare and often commented on her body, noting that although she was too skinny, she had an. Ignoring her visible and communicated discomfort, Mr. Combs persisted and continued to intrude when Miss Richard was in the dressing room, continued to touch her area under the guise of showing the stylist what to do, and continued to smack her butt without consent. In or around October 2010, Diddy Dirty Money performed in Glasgow, Scotland, where Mr. Combs engaged in overt advances towards Miss Richard. On numerous occasions when Miss Richard exited the dressing room fully styled, Mr. Combs looked at her approvingly and would smack her butt while making comments such as, "You're looking good. Okay, Dawn, okay. I see what it is," in a flirtatious tone. Each time Miss Richard moved away and asked him not to touch her, Mr. Combs disregarded her protests. On their last night in Glasgow, Miss Richard witnessed Mr. Combs and several other males gang Mr. Combs' female assistant at the hotel pool. Huh? Miss Richard immediately left and went to her hotel room. On their flight back to the United States the next day, Miss Richard asked Mr. Combs where his assistant was. Mr. Combs replied, "I don't give a where that is." Miss Richard later learned that Mr. Combs had taken his assistant's passport with him to the United States, leaving the assistant stranded in the UK. In Glasgow, Miss Harper confided in Miss Richard that her husband and manager, Tony Vick, was abusive. After an especially severe assault, she confided in Miss Richard that she wanted to leave Mr. Vick, and Miss Richard helped her plan her exit from the relationship. However, Miss Harper and Mr. Vick reconciled, and both Mr. Combs and Mr. Vick, who had a close relationship, learned of Miss Richard's role in helping Miss Harper. Both Mr. Combs and Mr. Vick became noticeably distrustful disapproval of Miss Richard, which exacerbated her fears of harm and reprisal. When Mr. Combs would require his Diddy Dirty Money bandmates to stay at his residence in Miami, Miss Richard would barricade herself inside of her room all night, placing heavy furniture against the door because she feared being harmed in her sleep. In or around late December 2010, Miss Richard, Miss Harper, and Miss Ventura were in Mr. Combs' Los Angeles home when Mr. Combs stated, "I want to give you fake for Christmas." Mr. Combs reached out and cupped Miss Richard's breast without her permission and stated, "You are an A, I'm thinking a D." That same thing he did to Cassie. He made her go get these and then they were too big and he got them removed the next day or something like that. Like, this man is a monster. Throughout the above mentioned time period, when Miss Richard resisted Mr. Combs' advances, Mr. Combs retaliated by denying her singing parts in songs, removing her from songs, refusing to allow her to sing in performances, and turning her microphone off during performances. The more Miss Richard rebuffed his advances, the more Mr. Combs' retaliatory behavior increased. Mr. Combs assaults and falsely imprisons Miss Richard. In or around December 2010, Diddy Dirty Money was preparing for an upcoming performance on Saturday Night Live. As usual, rehearsals lasted for days without the opportunity to eat or rest, and the rehearsal schedule was unpredictable. After waiting all day for Mr. Combs to call or send a car, Miss Richard received a phone call from Mr. Combs demanding, "Where the you bitches don't want this. Y'all don't deserve to have someone pick you up. Get a cab." Miss Richard and Miss Harper immediately took a taxi to the studio because Mr. Combs, it sounded, enraged. Upon their arrival at Sir Studios, Mr. Combs and Harve Pierre were waiting for them in the lobby. Mr. Combs screamed obscenities at them. Miss Richard noticed that people in the lobby were reacting to Mr. Combs' tirade. Embarrassed, Miss Richard asked Mr. Combs to stop swearing and calling them bitches in front of everyone. Mr. Combs' facial expression shifted as he stepped towards Miss Richard, raised his arm, and swung his fist towards her face. Believing that Mr. Combs was going to hit her, Miss Richard braced for the impact. Before Mr. Combs could strike, Mr. Combs' bodyguard grabbed her, escorted her out of the studio, and forced her into the Bad Boy Records Bentley that was parked outside. Miss Harper ran after Miss Richard, and Mr. Combs' bodyguard closed and locked the Bentley's doors with both women inside. Inside the vehicle, Miss Richard realized that there were no interior door handles and that they were locked inside with no way to escape. Miss Richard's belongings were in the studio, but she was able to call her father from Miss Harper's cell phone. Miss Richard relayed to her father what happened and that she needed help and feared that she would go missing. Moments later, Mr. Combs' bodyguard removed only Miss Harper from the Bentley, leaving Miss Richard locked in the car alone for over 2 hours. Miss Richard screamed as loudly as she could, but no one responded. It was late evening in the wintertime. The windows were heavily tinted and the interior of the car was dark except for faint interior lights. Miss Richard's belongings and a winter coat were in the studio while the ignition was off and there was no heat. With Mr. Combs' prior threats and violence running through her mind, Miss Richard felt sheer panic, terror, and feelings of claustrophobia at being locked in a small, dark, enclosed space with no way to communicate or call for help. She began to feel cold and feared for her life, not knowing when or if she would be released. Miss Richard's father drove to New York from Baltimore and arrived at the studio approximately 2 hours later. Only after her father arrived and demanded to see her did Mr. Pierre order Mr. Combs' bodyguard to release Miss Richard from the vehicle. Mr. Pierre ushered Miss Richard's father between several rooms at Sir Studio, where he waited for approximately 2 hours before being able to confront Mr. Combs. Once Miss Richard's father expressed that he intended to contact police, Mr. Combs warned him to think about your family and think about your daughter's career. Her father appeared visibly frightened by Mr. Combs' threats and actions, which in turn made Miss Richard feel terrified for herself and her family's safety. You call your dad to come handle a situation and your dad is shaking in their boots? Like, you're done. Like, what do you do? What do you do after that? Like, oh my God. The next night, Diddy Dirty Money performed on SNL. Mr. Combs subsequently called Miss Richard, complimented her performance, and concluded with a threat. You don't call your dad unless you're in the hospital. In 2020, Mr. Combs selected Miss Richard for a reboot of Making the Band, and Miss Richard spent hours preparing to be a judge on the new show. However, the COVID-19 pandemic halted those plans, and Miss Richard was never compensated in any way. During the summer of 2023, Mr. Combs' new record company, Love Records Inc., tendered a contract for negotiation to Miss Richard for the song titled Deliver Me. Continuing to the present, Miss Richard sought to establish her rightful percentage as a 21% composer. Mr. Combs personally called Miss Richard and left a voicemail complaining about her fair request. Mr. Combs directed his attorneys to avoid confirming the composition and in fact list composers who played no part in composing the song. As a result of the acts and conduct, Miss Richard has suffered and will continue to suffer loss of income, wages, benefits, royalties, promotional fees, touring fees, and other compensation. Miss Richard has also suffered, among other things, emotional pain, loss of enjoyment of life, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorder, insomnia, panic attacks, and other non-pecuniary losses, entitling her to an award of compensatory and punitive damages, attorney's fees and costs, and other remedies as this court may deem appropriate. That was a lot. That's going to be a lot to process. I'm not really shocked by anything after Little Rod's case and Cassie's documents, but as more and more comes out, it's just like, How is this man getting away with this for so long? Who did he piss off that now they're coming after him when so many people were involved? But that is the end of this video. I love you guys. I will see you in the next video.